No one wanted the night shift at that tower. 3 security guards quit within weeks, no one knew why. But a broke single black father took the job anyway. His daughter needed school money. In the dead of night, he discovered a truth that could kill thousands, and finally understood why the others had run. Hours later, when he thought it was all over, a luxury car pulled up outside his rundown apartment. The person who stepped out owned the entire building. Why would a billionaire come knocking at his door? William Randy ironed his new security uniform on the kitchen counter, the only flat surface in their cramped apartment that wasn't covered with Serena's school books. The fabric was stiff and cheap, the kind that would chafe after a few hours, but he smoothed out every wrinkle like he was preparing for a job interview at a Fortune 500 company. His daughter sat at the wobbly dining table, her pencil scratching against paper as she worked through her math homework. At 10 years old, Serena had already learned not to ask for things they couldn't afford. She never complained about her secondhand clothes or the fact that they'd eaten rice and beans 3 times that week. She just studied harder, dreamed bigger, and loved her father with a quiet fierceness that broke his heart every single day. "Daddy, are you tired?" Serena looked up from her notebook, her brown eyes filled with concern that no child her age should carry. William hung the uniform on the back of a chair and walked over to her. He knelt down so they were eye to eye, something his own father had never done for him. "I'm not tired, baby girl. I'm just doing what needs to be done so you can do what you want to do." Serena reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She'd drawn 2 stick figures, one tall, one short, holding hands under a yellow sun. Above them, in her careful handwriting, were the words, "Daddy is my superhero." William took the drawing and pressed it against his chest. "You know what, I'm going to keep this right here." He tucked it into his shirt pocket right over his heart. "That way you'll be with me all night." Serena smiled, and for a moment the peeling wallpaper and the sound of neighbors arguing through thin walls disappeared. There was just a father and his daughter, and a love that poverty couldn't diminish. 3 years ago, William had buried his wife after a battle with cancer that had drained their savings and left him with nothing but grief and a 7-year-old who needed him to be strong. He'd worked every job society looked down on: dishwasher, janitor, warehouse loader, taking shifts no one else wanted because he had no choice. His philosophy was simple: no honest work was shameful. Only refusing to work was shameful. Tonight would be his first shift at Whitmore Tower, a 52-story glass monument to wealth and power that dominated the city's skyline. The building housed the headquarters of Whitmore Holdings, one of the largest real estate companies in the country. 3 security guards had quit the night shift in the past month, and no one seemed eager to explain why. But the pay was better than anything William had seen in years, and Serena's tuition was due in 3 weeks. He kissed his daughter's forehead, made sure Mrs. Patterson from next door would check on her, and stepped out into the night. The contrast hit him the moment he arrived. His own neighborhood was a maze of crumbling brick and broken streetlights where hope felt like a luxury. Whitmore Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, its lobby gleaming with marble floors and chandeliers that probably cost more than every apartment in his building combined. William walked through the entrance and stopped in front of a large portrait hanging on the wall. The woman in the painting was black like him, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that commanded respect. She wore a tailored blazer and stood with her arms crossed, projecting power and confidence. Beneath the portrait, a brass plaque read, "Building is not just about creating structures. It's about creating places where people are protected. Kara Whitmore." "That's the boss." A voice came from behind him. William turned to find a heavy-set man in a supervisor's uniform approaching. The man's name tag read, Gerald. "Mrs. Whitmore started with nothing, just like you and me," Gerald continued, gesturing at the portrait. "Built this whole empire from scratch. But now, she's on the 52nd floor and we're in the basement. Different worlds." Gerald led William through the building, explaining the patrol routes, the check-in procedures, the areas that were off-limits. He spoke quickly like he wanted to get through the orientation as fast as possible, his eyes never quite meeting William's. When they reached the locker room, William changed into his uniform and asked the question that had been nagging at him. "The guys before me, the ones who quit. What happened to them?" Gerald's jaw tightened. "They weren't cut out for the job. Night shift isn't for everyone. 3 guys in 1 month. That's a lot of people not cut out for the same job." Gerald stopped walking. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, fear maybe, or warning. Then it was gone. "Look, Randy, you seem like a decent guy. Just do your rounds, punch your clock, and go home to that little girl of yours. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." Before William could respond, Gerald handed him a flashlight and a 2-way radio, then disappeared down the corridor. That night, William made his first patrol alone. The building was different after dark, quieter, emptier, almost alive in its silence. His footsteps echoed through deserted hallways where thousands of people worked during the day, their desks now abandoned, their computers dark. Around midnight, he stepped outside to get some air and noticed a man loading boxes into a beat-up sedan in the parking lot. The man wore the same uniform William had on, but his name tag was missing. He moved with the hurried, hunched posture of someone who didn't want to be seen. William approached him. "Hey, you work here." The man looked up, startled. His face was gaunt with dark circles under his eyes. "Used to. Name's Darnell." "I'm William. Just started tonight." He extended his hand, but Darnell just stared at it. "You're the new guy." Darnell shook his head slowly, something like pity crossing his face. "Let me give you some advice, brother. Don't ask too many questions. Don't look too hard at anything. Don't think too much. Just do your shift, take your paycheck, and go home." William frowned. "Why'd you quit?" Darnell loaded the last box into his trunk and slammed it shut. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the tower looming above them, its windows reflecting the city lights like 1,000 watching eyes. "Because I still want to sleep at night," he finally said. Then he got in his car and drove away without another word. William returned to his patrol with Darnell's warning echoing in his mind. The building suddenly felt less like a workplace and more like a secret waiting to be discovered. At 2 in the morning, his route took him to sub-basement level 2, the mechanical floor. Most guards probably walked through quickly checking boxes on their clipboards without really looking. But William had spent years working construction before Serena was born. He knew what buildings were supposed to sound like, smell like, feel like. And something here was wrong. He heard it first, a faint dripping sound that shouldn't have been there. Following the noise, he found himself in front of the fire suppression system's main hub. The pipes were covered in rust corrosion, eating through the metal like cancer. Several valves were so deteriorated they would never open in an emergency. Others had already failed completely, leaving gaps in the system that would be catastrophic if a fire ever broke out. William pulled out his phone and took pictures, his hands steady despite the dread building in his chest. Then he accessed the electronic maintenance logs on a nearby terminal. According to the records, the system had passed inspection just 2 months ago. Every report for the past 18 months showed the same result: meets all standards. But William had worked with these systems before. He knew what a functioning fire suppression setup looked like, and this wasn't it. These pipes hadn't been properly maintained in years. The records were lies. He dug deeper. Emergency exit doors, emergency lighting, smoke detectors. Every system showed the same pattern, glowing reports that contradicted the deteriorating reality in front of his eyes. More than 3,000 people worked in this building every day. Executives, secretaries, janitors, security guards. Kara Whitmore herself probably sat in her office on the 52nd floor, trusting that her building would protect her if something went wrong. If a fire broke out, this place would become a death trap. William finished his shift and went straight to Gerald's office. He laid out everything: the photos, the discrepancies in the logs, the danger that thousands of people faced every single day without knowing it. Gerald's face went pale. He grabbed William's arm and pulled him inside, shutting the door. "Are you out of your mind? Do you know who signed off on the contract with that maintenance company, Harris, the VP of Operations? He's been getting kickbacks from them for years. You think he's going to let some night shift security guard blow up his whole operation? But if there's a fire," Gerald cut him off, "then people will die. That's true. But if you open your mouth about this, the only thing that dies for certain is your career. You'll be fired before the sun comes up, and no security company in this city will touch you. Harris has connections everywhere." Gerald's voice dropped. "You have a daughter, William. Think about her." William stood there, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He thought about Serena's tuition, the rent, the groceries, all the things that depended on him keeping this job. Then he thought about the 3,000 people who walked into this building every morning, trusting that someone had made sure they were safe. He thought about the woman in the portrait and her words. Building is not just about creating structures, it's about creating places where people are protected. He thought about what kind of man he wanted his daughter to see when she looked at him. Gerald was still talking, but William had stopped listening. He walked out of the office without another word, his mind already working through what he would do next. When his shift ended at 6 in the morning, he drove home through empty streets. Serena was still asleep when he got there, her small body curled around her old teddy bear, her face peaceful in a way that only children could manage. He sat down on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe. On her nightstand was a stack of library books about medicine, her latest obsession preparation for the career she dreamed about. William pulled out the drawing she'd given him. The paper was already creased from being pressed against his chest all night. What would a superhero do? He looked at his daughter's sleeping face and made his decision. The next 3 nights, William became a different kind of security guard. Instead of walking past problems, he walked toward them. Instead of checking boxes, he documented evidence. He moved through the building methodically, photographing every corroded pipe, every broken emergency light, every fire door that wouldn't close properly. He copied maintenance reports and compared them to the reality in front of his eyes. The gap between what was documented and what actually existed grew wider with every floor he inspected. The truth was worse than he'd initially thought. This wasn't just negligence in one system, it was systematic failure across the entire building. Whoever was responsible had been cutting corners for years, pocketing the money that should have gone to keeping people safe. On his 4th night, Gerald barely looked at him. The older man had been avoiding William since their conversation, communicating only through curt nods and memos left on the desk. The silence said everything Gerald knew what William was doing, and he wanted no part of it. William understood. Gerald had his own family, his own bills, his own reasons to stay quiet. He couldn't blame the man for protecting himself, but he couldn't follow his example either. Around 11 that night, William made his way to the lobby. The building was nearly empty, just a few late-working executives and the cleaning crew making their rounds. He approached the front desk where a woman in her 50s was organizing paperwork. Her name tag said Rosa, and she was one of the few people in the building who actually smiled at him when he passed. "Working late again, Mr. Randy?" Rosa looked up with warm eyes. "You want some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." William leaned against the counter. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something." "Of course. What do you need?" He chose his next words carefully. "If someone wanted to report something important, something that couldn't go through normal channels, how would they reach Mrs. Whitmore directly?" Rosa's expression shifted. She glanced around the empty lobby, then back at William. "Why do you ask?" "Because I found something that she needs to know about, and I don't trust anyone else to tell her." Rosa studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she reached under her desk and pulled out a sticky note. She wrote something on it and slid it across the counter. When Mrs. Whitmore first became CEO, she set up a special email address. It's for employees to send concerns directly to her, bypassing all the managers and executives in between. Most people don't know about it because most people assume it's just for show. Rosa lowered her voice. But she reads every single message. I know because I sent one once about a supervisor who was harassing the cleaning staff. He was gone within a week. William looked at the email address on the sticky note. His ticket to being heard or his ticket to unemployment. "Thank you," he said. Rosa held his gaze. "Whatever you found, Mr. Randy, it must be serious. Be careful. The people at the top don't always like it when someone from the bottom tells them the truth." William tucked the note into his pocket right next to Serena's drawing. "I know, but some things matter more than being careful." He spent the next 2 hours in the security office composing an email that might end his career. He wrote and rewrote, trying to find the balance between urgent and professional, between concerned and accusatory. He attached every photo, every falsified report, every piece of evidence he'd gathered over the past 4 nights. At 4 in the morning, he sat in front of the computer, his finger hovering over the send button. The cursor blinked at him like a warning light. He thought about Serena asleep in their apartment, trusting her father to make the right choices. What kind of father would he be if he taught her that doing the right thing only mattered when it was convenient? What kind of man would he be if he stayed silent while thousands of people walked into a death trap every morning he pressed send? The email disappeared into the void, and William felt something release in his chest. Whatever happened next, he had done what his conscience demanded. The rest was out of his hands. A notification popped up on the security system. Someone had accessed the email log remotely. Within minutes, Gerald appeared in the doorway, his face gray. "What did you do?" Gerald's voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw the system alert. You sent something to the executive server. What did you do?" William stood up from the chair. "I did what someone should have done a long time ago." Gerald's hands were shaking. "You don't understand. Harris monitors everything. He has people in IT who flag any communication that goes above him. He'll know by morning." Gerald struggled to regain composure. "You just signed your own termination papers." "Maybe," William said. "But at least I'll be able to look my daughter in the eye." He walked past Gerald, grabbed his things from the locker room, and finished the last 2 hours of his shift in silence. When 6 o'clock came, he clocked out and went home knowing that everything was about to change. The next day crawled by in agonizing silence. William made breakfast for Serena, walked her to the bus stop, and tried to act like everything was normal. But every time his phone buzzed, his heart stopped. Every time he checked his email, he expected to see a response from Kara Whitmore. Nothing came. By late afternoon, the silence had become its own kind of torture. No acknowledgement from the CEO's office, no call from HR, no angry confrontation from Harris. Just empty hours stretching into more empty hours. William showed up for his 5th night shift, half expecting to be turned away at the door. Instead, Gerald handed him his patrol schedule without a word. The other guards avoided eye contact. People whispered when he walked by, then fell silent when he got close. He was already a ghost. They just hadn't made it official yet. The confirmation came at the end of his shift, delivered not with drama but with cold efficiency. A single email from Human Resources appeared in his inbox at 5:45 in the morning. "Dear Mr. Randy, we regret to inform you that your contract will not be renewed effective immediately. This decision is based on performance evaluations, indicating that you do not meet the requirements for continued employment. Please return your uniform and access badge to the security office before leaving the premises. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." No mention of his report, no accusation of wrongdoing. Just a clean, quiet elimination, the kind that left no fingerprints. William read the email twice, waiting to feel something. Anger, maybe, or fear. Instead, there was just a hollow numbness, like the moment after a car accident when the body hasn't yet registered the damage. He returned his uniform. He handed over his badge. He walked out of Whitmore Tower for the last time as the sun rose over the city, painting the glass facade in shades of gold and orange. The building looked beautiful in the morning light, its secrets hidden behind gleaming walls. Gerald caught up with him in the parking lot. The older man looked like he hadn't slept in days. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You're a good man, Randy. Better than most." William didn't turn around. "Being good doesn't pay the bills." "No, it doesn't." Gerald's voice cracked. "I hope she reads it. I hope someone up there actually gives a damn." William got in his car and drove home. The apartment was quiet when he arrived. Serena had already left for school a note on the kitchen table telling him she'd made herself cereal and that she loved him. Beside the note was a stack of mail he'd been too exhausted to open. He flipped through the envelope's bills, mostly the constant hemorrhage of money that never seemed to stop. Then his hand froze on a letter from Serena's school. Tuition reminder. $1,200 due in 18 days. William sank into a kitchen chair, the letter trembling in his hands. $1,200? A month ago, that amount had seemed manageable tight, but doable with his new salary. Now it might as well have been $12 million. He'd been blacklisted. Gerald had made that clear. Harris had connections at every security company in the city. No one would hire him. Even if he found another job washing dishes or cleaning offices, it would take months to save that kind of money. Serena would have to leave her school. The school she loved with the teachers who believed in her and the library full of medical books she devoured like novels. The school that was supposed to be her path out of this life into the future she deserved. William put his head in his hands. Had he made a mistake? Had his principles cost his daughter her dreams? The questions circled in his mind, picking at the certainty he'd felt just hours ago. Maybe Darnell had been right. Maybe Gerald had been right. Maybe the smart thing, the responsible thing would have been to keep his head down and his mouth shut like everyone else. But then, William thought about the 3,000 people who would walk into that building in a few hours. Mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, all of them trusting that someone had made sure they were safe. If a fire broke out today, how many of them would make it out? He couldn't control whether Kara Whitmore read his email. He couldn't control whether Harris faced consequences or whether the building got fixed. But he could control what kind of man he was. He could control whether his daughter grew up knowing that her father stood for something. The tuition bill sat on the table demanding to be dealt with. But it wasn't more important than human lives. It wasn't more important than integrity. It wasn't more important than being able to answer honestly when Serena someday asked him what he did when he knew something was wrong. William went to the window and watched the sun climb higher over the city. He had done the right thing. He had to believe that mattered, even if the world never rewarded him for it. 47 floors above where William had spent his nights patrolling, Kara Whitmore sat in her corner office as the first light of dawn touched the city skyline. She had built her morning routine around discipline, up at 5, exercise by 5:30 at her desk, by 6, to read through her private inbox before the chaos of the day began. Most CEOs delegated their email to assistants who filtered out anything unpleasant or inconvenient. Kara refused. When she'd taken over Whitmore Holdings 15 years ago, she'd created this special address precisely because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. She'd started as a secretary in this very building back when the original Whitmore, a man who never learned her name despite seeing her every day, had owned it. She'd watched good people get silenced, pushed out, broken by a system that rewarded loyalty to power over loyalty to truth. When she finally clawed her way to the top, she swore things would be different. The email address was her way of keeping that promise, a direct line from the bottom to the top, bypassing every manager and executive who might want to protect themselves instead of the company. This morning, one email stood out. The subject line was simple: urgent life safety violations. Evidence attached. Kara clicked it open and began to read. 20 minutes later, she was still sitting in the same position, but everything had changed. The photos filled her screen, corroded pipes, broken valves, deteriorated emergency systems. The maintenance log showed 18 months of falsified reports, all signed off by an outside contractor. The analysis was detailed, methodical, written by someone who clearly understood building systems. The sender was a night shift security guard named William Randy. Kara's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Not from fear, from rage. Her building, her company, her name on that plaque in the lobby promising that this was a place where people were protected. And someone had turned it into a lie. She summoned her head of engineering within the hour. The man arrived nervous, sensing something was wrong. Kara showed him the photos without explanation and asked a single question. "Is this real?" The engineer studied the images, his face growing paler with each one. "I'd need to inspect personally to confirm, but these appear to be our systems, and if so, the deterioration shown here is severe." "How severe?" "If this is accurate, the fire suppression system would fail completely in an emergency. The building would need to be evacuated immediately pending full inspection and repair." Kara dismissed him and made her next call to her head of security. "The maintenance contractor we use for fire systems. Who manages that relationship?" The answer came quickly. "That would be Mr. Harris, ma'am, Vice President of Operations." Of course it was. Harris had been with the company for 12 years, promoted 3 times, trusted with increasing responsibility. He played golf with board members. He sent Kara birthday cards. He smiled in every meeting and told her everything was running smoothly. She pulled his financial record, something she had the authority to do as CEO, though she rarely exercised it. The pattern emerged within minutes. Deposits that didn't match his salary, timing that corresponded with contract renewals. The maintenance company had been paying him to look the other way while they pocketed money that should have gone to keeping 3,000 people safe. Kara sat back in her chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. She had trusted the system. She had trusted her people. And they had failed her worse. They had failed everyone who walked through those doors, believing they would be protected. But one person hadn't failed. One person had seen the truth and refused to stay silent. One person had risked everything to make sure she knew. She pulled up William Randy's personnel file. Night shift security guard, hired 3 weeks ago, terminated this morning at Harris's request officially for performance issues. But the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Kara called HR. The security guard who was let go this morning. William Randy. What was the real reason for his termination? The HR director hesitated. "Mr. Harris said he wasn't meeting job requirements, ma'am. Standard procedure." "Did anyone verify that assessment independently?" Silence on the other end. That was answer enough. Kara ended the call and stared out her window at the city below. Somewhere down there in one of those neighborhoods she'd never visited, a man had just lost his job for doing what everyone else had been afraid to do. He'd sent this email knowing it might destroy his career. He'd told the truth when lying would have been so much easier. She'd built her company on the idea that integrity mattered. It was time to prove it. By 9 o'clock, Harris was suspended pending investigation. By 10, the building was being evacuated floor by floor, while emergency inspection teams moved in. By 11, the maintenance contractor's lawyers were already calling, trying to negotiate before the lawsuits began. But Kara wasn't thinking about lawsuits. She was thinking about a security guard who had seen something wrong and refused to look away. She told her assistant to have the car ready. William had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, his head resting on his folded arms, the tuition bill still clutched in his hand. He woke to the sound of commotion outside, voices, car doors, the unusual hum of activity in a neighborhood where nothing ever happened. He went to the window and looked down. A black Mercedes was parked at the curb, gleaming like something from another world. Neighbors had gathered on their stoops watching, whispering. And walking toward his building alone was a woman he recognized from a portrait in a marble lobby. Kara Whitmore. In the flesh. At his door. William's first thought was that he was about to be threatened. Rich people didn't visit poor neighborhoods to deliver good news. They sent lawyers for that. When they showed up in person, it meant they wanted to look you in the eye while they destroyed you. He opened the door before she could knock. Mrs. Whitmore. She was smaller than her portrait suggested, but her presence filled the cramped hallway. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, assessing, met his without flinching. "Mr. Randy, may I come in?" He stepped aside suddenly, aware of the peeling wallpaper, the water stain on the ceiling, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. She walked into his apartment like it was a boardroom, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. "I'm here to tell you two things," she said, turning to face him. William braced himself. "First, thank you." Her voice carried a weight that surprised him. "What you did, the risk you took, saved lives. Not hypothetically, not symbolically. Actually saved them. If a fire had broken out in that building with the systems in their current state, people would have died. My employees, my tenants, possibly myself. You prevented that." William didn't know what to say. He'd expected accusations, not gratitude. "Second," Kara continued, "I want you to come back to work. Not as a night shift security guard. As the head of a new safety oversight team. You would report directly to my office, not to Harris, not to anyone who might want to bury problems instead of solving them. Your job would be to find what everyone else misses and make sure I hear about it." The words didn't make sense. William heard them, understood them individually, but couldn't assemble them into anything that matched his reality. "Why?" Kara's expression softened slightly. "Because I've met hundreds of people with degrees and titles in corner offices. People who know how to play the game, how to protect themselves, how to say what I want to hear. And when something went wrong, when something dangerous was happening right under their noses, they stayed quiet. They covered it up. They chose their careers over their integrity." She looked at him directly. "You didn't. You had nothing, no power, no protection, no safety net. And you still told the truth. That's not something I can teach, but it's something I can recognize, and it's something I need." William thought about the tuition bill on his table. The $1,200 he didn't have, the future he'd thought was lost. "I didn't do it for a promotion," he said. "I know. That's why I'm offering you one." Before William could respond, the apartment door opened. Serena walked in home from school, her backpack dragging on the floor behind her. She stopped when she saw the elegant stranger standing in their living room. "Daddy? Who's that?" Kara turned to face the little girl. Her businesslike demeanor shifted into something warmer. "You must be Serena. Your father mentioned you in his email." Serena looked at her father, confused. "What email?" William walked over to his daughter and knelt beside her. "I'll explain everything later, baby girl. This is Mrs. Whitmore. She owns the building where Daddy was working." Kara crouched down, too, bringing herself to Serena's eye level. "Your father is a very brave man, Serena. Did you know that?" Serena nodded solemnly. "He's my superhero." Something flickered across Kara's face, recognition perhaps, or memory. "He has a gift, your daddy. He does the right thing even when nobody's watching, even when it's hard, even when it costs him everything." She glanced at William, then back at Serena. "That's rare. Rarer than you might think." Serena beamed with pride, the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that only children could muster. Kara stood and extended her hand to William. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Randy?" William looked at his daughter. He looked at the bills on the counter, the water stain on the ceiling, the life he'd been struggling to hold together with both hands. Then he looked at the woman who had come all this way to acknowledge something everyone else had tried to bury. He shook her hand. "We have a deal." Kara nodded and handed him a business card with her direct number. "My office will be in touch with the details. Take a few days. Spend time with your daughter. You've earned it." She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "Mr. Randy, William, I started where you are. Different circumstances, same struggle. I know what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be told your voice doesn't matter. Don't ever let anyone make you believe that again." Then she was gone. the Mercedes pulling away as neighbors craned their necks to watch. Serena tugged at her father's hand. "Daddy, what happened? Why was that lady here?" William picked her up and held her close, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. He thought about everything that had happened over the past 5 days, the fear, the doubt, the moments when he'd wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. "You know how you said I was your superhero?" he asked. Serena nodded against his shoulder. "Well, I learned something important. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just do the right thing and hope it matters." He pulled back and looked at her with those serious brown eyes so much like her mother's. "And sometimes if they're very lucky, it does." Serena studied his face the way children do when they're trying to understand something beyond their years. "Does this mean we're going to be okay?" William smiled the first real smile in days. "Yeah, baby girl, we're going to be okay." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood. Somewhere across town, a building full of people had been evacuated, protected from a disaster they'd never know how close they'd come to experiencing. And in a cramped apartment, with peeling wallpaper and bills on the counter, a father held his daughter and let himself believe that doing the right thing still meant something in this world. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the drawing Serena had given him on that first night, wrinkled now soft from being carried close to his heart. 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Some things were worth more than money. Some things were worth more than safety. Some things were worth risking everything for. William Randy had learned that lesson the hard way, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life.